With the REST API that we have developed so far, it is of no use to our React UI application because this REST API it is always going to return a static string value. But our React UI application is expecting a list of product details from the database, which it can display on the UI to the end user. That's why, as a next step, we need to focus on enhancing this REST API to read the product details from a database. As of now, our application does not have any database. First, we need to set up a database, followed by we need to store the product details into the database. Once the database is ready, we can update our business logic to read the data from the database and send the same to the UI application. That's the plan that I have by the end of this section. First, let's try to set up a database. Whenever you're trying to set up a database, you're going to have multiple options like MySQL, followed by Oracle, Postgres. So these are all the production ready databases used by the real applications. We are going to use one of these database in the upcoming sections. But inside this section, I want to show an in-memory database with the name H2 database. The advantage of this H2 database is you don't need to install any software. You don't need to set up any database server. You can simply add a dependency inside your Spring Boot application, and behind the scenes, Spring Boot application, it is going to create an in-memory database, and inside this in-memory database, we can store all the required data. This H2 database should be used only during the development and testing phases. We should not use this inside production applications. The reason why I want to explain about this H2 database is sometimes in real projects also, you may need to build some small demos, or you may need to build some small applications for some testing purpose. In all such scenarios, setting up the production database like MySQL, Oracle, it is going to require some time and effort. Whereas with H2 database, it is going to be super quick. And as a developer, you can simply focus on your demo scenario. I hope you're clear. Let's go to the pom.xml and try to add the required dependencies. As of now here, we have only two dependencies with the name Spring Boot Starter Web and Spring Boot Starter Test. To add the H2 database into our application, we need to search for a dependency with the name H2. Here they clearly highlighted this dependency. It is going to provide a fast in-memory database that supports JDBC API, but this database should be used only for small footprint, which means only for smaller applications that requires a smaller amount of data inside the database. For real applications, we should not use this database. This is one dependency. The other dependency that we need to add is JPA. If you search for JPA, you're going to get a starter project with the name Spring Data JPA. This starter project, it is going to enable us by providing all the required components to query a database. Usually, database is a separate component. In order to communicate with the database, like reading the data, saving the data, deleting the data, developers, they have to write some Java code. To develop such a database-related logic, we need to use these dependencies Spring Data JPA. We're going to talk more about Spring Data JPA in the coming lectures. For now, let's try to add this dependency. So these are the two dependencies. You can click on this Explore and you can try to copy the two dependencies. The very first one is Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. The other one is H2 database. You can copy these two dependencies and paste here inside the pom.xml. You can also add these dependencies with the help of IntelliJ itself. If you are using IntelliJ Ultimate version, you're going to have this option of add starters inside your pom.xml. If you click on this, it is going to ask you what are the starter projects that we want to add. Here, let me type H2 and select this H2 database. Followed by, I'm going to type JPA and select the Spring Data JPA dependency. As soon as I click on this OK, those two dependencies like Spring Boot Starter Data JPA and H2 database will be added into my pom.xml. I just have to make sure I'm doing a build. Once a build is completed, we can try to start our application. But before we try to do that, I want to add a property inside application.properties file. Let me open applications.properties. The property name that I want to add is logging.pattern.console. Instead of typing logging.pattern.console, what I can do is I can try to type the first character of each word, L.P.C. With this shortcut, my IntelliJ is going to give me all the properties that are starting with these characters that I have mentioned. Let me select this logging.pattern.console. To this property, I'm going to add a value. You can get this value from the GitHub repo as well. What I'm trying to do with this logging.pattern.console is all the logs that my application is going to generate during the startup and during the execution of our business logic, all such logs, I want them to be printed onto the console using a specific pattern. This pattern is going to help me to read my logs easily. If you try to understand this pattern, first, I'm trying to display what is the time when the log is being printed. These time details, I want them to be displayed using green color, followed by what is the log level, whether it is info, error, warning. Such log levels, we want them to be displayed using blue color, followed by thread details. We want them to be displayed using red color. When I say thread, it will be the name of your Java class and the name of the Java methods. And at last, we want to display the actual log message using yellow color. We're going to talk in detail about logging and the levels and how to configure these logins in the upcoming sections. For now, I want to get started with this property alone, which is going to print all our logs in a clear, understandable format. I'll show you the demo of this logging pattern in few seconds. Let me save this, do the build. Once the build is completed, I'm going to start my application. This time you will be able to see all my logs, they have some colors. I think this double quote is getting printed unnecessarily at the starting of each of the log statement. Let me check what is the issue. I think we don't need these double quotes. We can remove these ending double quote followed by whatever I have at the starting. Let me remove them and save this. Do the build. Once the build is completed, I'll try to restart my application. This time my logs are printing correctly. All the logs will be printed using a single line. This is not going to be convenient to read your logs. You need to scroll right side every time. This can be avoided by using these soft wrap option. If we click on the soft wrap option, all your logs, they are going to be wrapped to the next line. Now let's try to understand how our logs they are looking. If you can see, there is time information, there is log level information, there is thread information, followed by actual message details. This pattern, it is going to be help you to read the logs very clearly. I hope you like this pattern. I also recommend you using this pattern inside your development environments to make your life easy. This time, if you try to understand the logs of our application that are generated during the startup, based upon the new dependencies that we have added, more number of auto configurations are done by my Spring Boot application. If you can scroll down, there is a database created with the URL connection details as highlighted here. To connect to this database, you should use an username as SA, and by default for the H2 database, the password it is going to be empty. That's why password is not printed here. And similarly, you will be able to see there are some database related configurations and beans are loaded into your application. This is the beauty of Spring Boot application. Once you add your dependency, the Spring Boot, it is going to assume some default configurations and accordingly it is going to create the beans out of the box during the startup, which is a savior to the developers. Otherwise, they have to create all these beans manually. Now we have our H2 database set up by the Spring Boot application. We can try to access this database using browser, but by default, the access to this H2 database is disabled. To enable this access, we need to add a property. Let me try to add that property. But before that, you may have a question which is, how do you know all these properties? It's very simple. All the property details are available in the official documentation. If you go to the projects and open the Spring Boot, under this page, there is an option learn. Let me click on the same and you can click on this reference doc. Inside this official documentation towards the end, there is an appendix. Let me click on the same. And at the appendix, we have common application properties. These are all the properties that are supported by the Spring Boot to perform various configurations. There'll be easily more than 1,000 different properties. You don't need to by heart all these properties. Whenever you have some question, you can always come to this page and try to look for the properties which are related to a specific functionality. Here, if I search for H2, there are good amount of properties which are going to help me to override the default configurations. The property that I'm looking is to enable the H2 console. By default, it is going to have the false, but by overriding this property to a true, we can enable the H2 console and we can try to access that H2 console using a path inside the browser. When this H2 console is enabled, the path that you should access is h2-console. This is the default path. If needed, you can override this default path by using this property. This way, you can always try to understand what is the reason of each of the property and try to use the same inside your application as well. Let me copy this property and paste it here. The default value is false. Let me mention true so that the H2 console is going to be enabled. Once this is completed, let me do the build, followed by I'm going to restart my application. Once the application is restarted, I'll go to the browser and try to access the path localhost 8082/h2-console. As soon as I access that path, a window will appear where it is going to ask me what is your JDBC URL, what is the username and password. By default, the username it is going to be SA and the password is going to be empty. This JDBC URL you can get from your console logs. This URL it is always going to be dynamic, but we can make this as a static value by adding a property which I'm going to show you in the next lecture. For now, let's copy this dynamic value and paste under the JDBC URL. Driver class should be org.h2.driver. It is going to be automatically populated. Once all these details are filled, you can click on this connect. This is how the web console of H2 database it is going to look like. Using this console, we can execute SQL statements. As of now, there is only one users table is available, which is created by H2 database for its internal functioning. We don't have any user-defined tables. We're going to create them in the coming lectures. I hope you're clear with the setup that we have done so far. As a next step, let's try to understand how to create the tables and data inside this H2 database.